Anglo-Saxon influence on English. Throughout the evolution of the English language, the grammar and vocabulary has been reshaped, influenced, and changed in many ways by many different groups of people. English has borrowed words from many different languages, for example, from the Anglo-Saxons. Years and years ago, connected by a common language tree, Proto-Indo-European, the Anglo-Saxon groups most definitely aided in the transformation of the English language into what it is today through a series of events and gradual changes. As noted earlier, one of the most influential groups to affect English was the Anglo-Saxons, starting in the early 400s AD. The Anglo-Saxons are collectively referred to as a group of three different yet related Germanic tribes, those being the Jutes, Angles, and Saxons. Though they all spoke distinctively different languages and inhabited different regions before invading the British Isles, it is likely those Germanic languages were in fact very closely related, since linguists have found they evolved from one common language, Proto-Indo-European. That being said, it is suggested there was a certain level of communication between the Jutes, Angles, and Saxons. It wasn't roughly until 430 AD that first of the three tribes, the Jutes, began to invade Britain, which was home to the original inhabitants, the Celtic tribes, who were united by common speech, culture, customs, and religion. The Jutes offered an in for other Germanic tribes by being on British mainland, which lended a lot of advantages. Soon after, other Germanic tribes, specifically the Angles and Saxons, began crossing into the North Sea into Britain. Generally speaking, over time, those Germanic tribes began to establish a permanent living in Britain, dispersing the weakened Celts out of their original home, or at some level, were absorbed into the Anglo-Saxon society by adopting their language, culture, and ideas. It suggested their lack of a strong political structure made the Celts vulnerable to outside invasions, as shown by the Anglo-Saxons conquering. As such, they were pushed out. Linguists believe the Celts did not have much influence on the English language. Rather, together the tribes grew increasingly more powerful and thus began influencing the English language. Following, the three united Anglo-Saxon groups were able to eventually conquer Britain. In order to effectively manage the large territory, the Anglo-Saxons divided the land into 7 kingdoms known as the Heptarchy. The Saxons controlled the kingdoms Essex, Wessex, and Sussex, while the Angles managed the kingdoms in the east, Anglia, Mercia, and Northumbria, and the Jutes were given the kingdom Kent. Once the kingdoms were established, the new Anglo-Saxon nation became known as England or England, meaning the land of the Angles. Later, it was shortened to England, and the emerging language, English, better known today as Old English, started its evolution around 600 AD of becoming a separate language, not just a Germanic dialect. However, the Anglo-Saxons' power streak was coming to a brutal end when in 871 AD, 6 of the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were taken over by invading Vikings. The only surviving kingdom left was Wessex in the south, governed by ruler Alfred the Great, who worked to unite the people during the Viking attacks. However, in a couple of ways, the Viking invasions were in fact good for Anglo-Saxon England. For one, it forced them to develop a stronger defensive military, and more importantly, since Wessex was the only Anglo-Saxon state left, they didn't have any competition, and became a united kingdom that could impose a permanent tax, called dangled, upon the people, enforce new laws, use administrators, and establish loyalty to the kingdom. As a result, Alfred the Great was more easily able to control and unite the Anglo-Saxon people on many common grounds, one being language.
Not only did the migration of Angles, Jutes, and Saxons into Britain impact the political history of England, it also influenced and helped create the communication we use today. A dialect is a certain form of a language, often spoken in a specific part of the world. Languages are simply bundles of dialects. Each language is made up of different versions, but there's no right version. As Old English developed as a language, it also developed dialects. As discussed before, we know that the different Germanic tribes began to settle in England, and they began to push more inland and started to establish more permanent bases. Eventually, the different Germanic tribes settled into 7 smaller kingdoms. Since these kingdoms had virtually no communication with each other, they started to develop their own linguistic norms. Eventually, Old English became a separate language rather than a German dialect. People only communicated with others in their village, and therefore different dialects were made from village to village. Today, there are 4 main dialects of Old English. However, this does not mean only 4 dialects developed. There are probably many more dialects, however, there are no written records of the other dialects, probably because they were not as important, so they were not written down. The 4 main dialects are Northumbrian, which was spoken north of the River Humber, Mercian, which was spoken in the Midlands, Kentish, which was spoken in Kent, and West Saxon, which was spoken in the southwest. Eventually, one of these dialects became the standard dialect. The reason that a certain dialect becomes standard is not because it is more important or better or more refined than other dialects of that language. It is because it is supported by social or political power. We know that King Alfred helped create a united kingdom. Moreover, he helped promote the English language. He did many things that helped strengthen England. When he came to the throne, Wessex was the only kingdom left. King Alfred helped rebuild religion, law, and learning. He made sure that everyone was educated in Old English instead of Latin. He also made many translations of great text into English. Also, during King Alfred's reign, a history of England was written called the Ango-Saxon Chronicle. Under his rule, English became a more well-known and sophisticated language. One important change that King Alfred made was claiming kingship of England. This unitement of England allowed English to become the standard language and also for a dialect to become the standard one. Because Wessex was the only surviving kingdom, the dialect West Saxon became the standard one, as it was supported by King Alfred and therefore rose up by having political power, not because it was better.
Old English, also known as Anglo-Saxon, also known as English, was a very different language from what we speak today. It may have sounded similar, but the writing and words were very different. Here's a bit of the prologue of Beowulf, a famous Old English epic. You've seen it before, when Mr. Leff explained how much the language has changed.
Hretwe gardena in jardagum, seid kuninga trimje frunon, hutha edelinga sellen fremedon. Oft skjuld shaving sjaldena thratum, monigum meitum meldo setla of teach, eizo de erolas.
Cool, right? One of the things you'll notice are those weird letters, like thorn and F. What are those? They're Old English letters left over from when we were using Celtic runes. When missionaries came and introduced Latin, they also brought vellum and paper, which could be written on with ink instead of carving tools. This allowed the runic alphabet to round out and become less angular. Most of the sounds were incorporated into the new alphabet, but some were kept as their own sounds. You may have heard that 1/2 of the words spoken in modern English are of Anglo-Saxon origin, while less than 1% of the words in the dictionary are. That's actually true. Even though English has changed a lot since Beowulf and incorporated words from around the world, our most common words are still close to Anglo-Saxon. If we look at that Beowulf passage, we can recognize many words. The Old English for "that was a good king" sounds almost like accented modern English. Of course, many words sound rightfully weird to us. In fact, Beowulf was sort of a mess to even the people that wrote it. Written and revised over 200 years, it uses 3 dialects and tons of synonyms. There are 36 words for hero in it, as well as 20 words for man and 11 for ship. This shows what a complex language English was at this point. Some of our most basic modern English words are really close to Old English. Water, house, food, sleep, night, and other pronouns and articles are there. Basically, the words we use most commonly are still close to their Old English versions. A modern example is Frisian, now spoken in the Netherlands and coastal Germany. It's close to the Germanic languages spoken in the time of Old English, so we find many words that, again, sound almost like accented modern English. For example, meal, lamb, goose, butter, cheese, rain, sneeuw, sleep, and blauw. Sorry for any pronunciation issues. This is not to say that it's all the same language. Old English is still very different. It has cases, inflections, and all sorts of crazy things we would never imagine in English today. Luckily, Tim can explain all of them.
Unlike modern English, grammatical gender was very present in Old English. Each noun and an adjective which modified them had a gender. Keep in mind that this gender doesn't really have anything to do with anything biological, it's just grammatical. Why is this important? Because nouns changed based off their grammatical gender, and this leads us to a very important thing in Old English, inflections. Inflections are basically endings put on words to show their use in the sentence, whether it's singular or plural and all of that. This is an especially important concept for nouns and pronouns. In modern English, you could use a noun like dog as the subject, direct object, or indirect object of a sentence. However, in Old English, you would need to change the word's ending based on its function, like is it a subject, a possessive, an object. Now, depending on a noun's gender, it would be changed or declined in a certain way in order to act as its appropriate function in the sentence. And it would be declined in a different way based on its gender, like the masculine ending for a subject is different from a feminine or neuter ending for a subject. Let's take the word ston in Old English. It means stone, by the way. It is considered a masculine noun. If ston is going to be the subject or an object for masculine declensions in the sentence, it says ston. But if it is going to be a possessive or genitive in the sentence, you must change it to stoness, or else it's wrong. If it is going to be an indirect object or dative, it gets changed to stonne. But the noun also has to be changed based on its number. The word forms just mentioned are singular and would be translated as stone. But if you mean stones, then you would need to make more word forms. The plural subject and direct object would be stannas, the plural possessive is stanna, and the plural indirect object is stannum. That makes 8 word forms for each word. Here's some tables showing the main masculine, feminine, and neuter endings. Because words in Old English, including verbs which we won't get into for this video, had special endings indicating their function in the sentence, word order was extremely loose, which is very different from modern English, where word order makes all the difference. In modern English, man bites dog and dog bites man mean very different things. In Old English, though, if we have the words for man, bites, and dog, as long as we put the appropriate endings on the words, we can put those words in any order. So dog with a subject ending bites man with a direct object ending, and man with a direct object ending bites dog with a subject ending. They would both mean dog bites man, as would man object ending dog subject ending bites, bites dog subject ending man object ending, and any other combination of the words, as long as you have the correct endings. Conversely, man subject ending bites dog object ending, and man object ending bites dog subject ending mean very different things. Basically, in Old English, endings matter, word order doesn't. In a broad spectrum, the migration of the Anglo-Saxons helped to shape the grammar, vocabulary, and culture of Old English, which eventually evolved into what we commonly speak today. That being said, language is constantly evolving, increasing or decreasing in complexity, and is uniting people by sharing a common form of communication.